Have you ever read W.D. Du Bois?
No, I have not. The Educator?
Yeah. Um, he hung out a lot in Richmond with Maggie Walker. He was an African American who
Yeah.
super brilliant guy. Kind of think W.D. Du Bois and Adam Smith, that would be one cocktail party I would really like to attend. But W.D. Du Bois had this thing, he called it the Mobile, Manchester, Manhattan Triangle. So one of his arguments is that what Europeans tend to think of capitalism springing out of England as being about intelligence, efficiency, and science. And he's saying that if you look at Manchester, what fueled the economic development of Manchester was both the gold and silver taken, but also the cotton. And so the development of Manchester is directly linked to the surplus value derived from using slave labor on stolen land. So the engine of capitalism, frequently in the arguments that you hear ideologically, is that European capitalism is a good model because it's based on markets and competition and a sort of, even if you will, a enlightened value of equal opportunity that spawns greater competition. And W.D. Du Bois is saying that it's better to call capitalism that we see coming out of the Anglo world racial capitalism, because it has historically always been built on obtaining resources at a cut cost. Now, workers in Manchester feel part of the system, but part of the thing that was giving rise to the European proletariat and the socialism and the safety net and everything like that in Europe was the surplus value taken from European imperial activities abroad. And of course, Manhattan fits in with, while England's doing the manufacturing, Manhattan is funding the insurance policies on the slaves, funding the transportation, the shipping, the marketing. So for W.D. Du Bois, his critique of economics from the Western world is that it continually surgically removes the non-capitalist relationships behind key inputs. So like right now, both of us are on apples, and of course there's kids, 8-year-olds in mines in Africa and women jumping out of sweatshops in China to produce this item that produces great returns on Wall Street. So did Adam Smith contemplate anything about what the role of transnational slavery and the sort of globalization we see, where frequently the exploitation is externalized outside of the eyesight and the political systems that are dealing with it and just kind of erased from the ledger system?
First of all, let me say, I'm so glad you turned me on to that information on Du Bois, and I'll have to look that up. And I'm certainly a huge fan of Maggie Walker. Smith did identify problems with slavery. I mean, throughout The Wealth of Nations, he castigates slavery, obviously, because The Wealth of Nations is a book about how do we lift poor people out of poverty. It's not a book about how to make the rich richer, or how do we get economic growth for the sake of a bigger GDP. And that gets back to one of those other quotes you started with. Smith never thought that wealth was a source of human happiness in the end. He called it a great deception of the human mind to seek after wealth. And he uses that to explain the movement of the transition of society over time, but he doesn't think that wealth is ever going to make you happy. And he worries a lot in The Wealth of Nations about a term I'm going to call monopsony. Everybody is familiar with monopoly, that's one seller. Monopsony means one buyer, and in this case, we're talking about one buyer of labor. And the reason that we worry about monopsony is that we say in some communities in Asia, they may not have access to competition for their labor, and thus one manufacturer can pay them a below market wage and exploit workers and, et cetera, et cetera. And when we talk about the cotton that Manchester was buying from Virginia, say, they were the single buyer because of the colonial trade. They had a lock on being able to buy the cotton from Virginia. And so a single buyer constitutes a monopsony, and it's an opportunity for exploitation, which Adam Smith was directly against. But there was not there were a couple of international conglomerates at his time. We think of the East India Company and a few other examples like that of huge multinational corporations in Smith's day. And generally, he was opposed to them. Generally, he thought they did more harm than good. So he often, and the reason is because they were granted monopoly status. So I don't know how he would feel about global enterprises today in a world in which we have competition and we don't have the government creating monopolies. We do have some monopolies like Google and others, and these are monopolies that formed in a marketplace. He would generally be, of course, opposed to monopolies and monopsonies if they are behind the hands of the government. And he would very much worry about workers getting exploited.
I read a blog post, a quote, that it really was, it struck me because it said that what Adam Smith, if we were to ask him what free trade means, Adam Smith, or free enterprise, or free trade for Adam Smith, it would mean freedom from oppression, freedom from restrictions, freedom for the worker to go to the market to get the best value for their labor or for their product. So for Adam Smith, freedom in the marketplace was about the restrictions on those who use government or privilege in order to restrict people's opportunity. So freedom was opportunity, not no government intervention or no society's involvement, no morality, or not anything impeding the maximization of profit.
Yeah, I like that. And Smith, by the way, was not in favor of profit. How do we know that? Well, if you read the Wealth of Nations, he said, those countries that have the highest rate of profit are the countries going most rapidly to ruin. Why would he say that? He would say that because in a normal competitive market, the rate of profit drops down to the mere opportunity to cover the mere opportunity cost of capital. So if you've had a chance, for your listeners who've had a chance to take Econ 101, we learned that in a competitive market system, economic profit drops to zero in the long run. In a competitive market, you can't earn extra normal profits if there are many buyers and many sellers in the long run. And so the reason Smith said the countries going most rapidly to ruin are the ones that have the highest profit is because it implies that their economic system is rigged with monopolies or monopsonies, and that will hold you back and destroy your economy. So Smith was not in favor of high profits. It's a strange story to tell. Even though we all seek profits, and even though the search for profit in a competitive market is what drives dynamic change in industry, and you need profit to sustain a business over the long run, and Smith would be all in favor of that. But he's not in favor of extra normal high profits in the long run.
What I have found in life very fascinating is the opportunities I've had to be with individuals that are placed high in corporate America in strategic roles. They will utilize frequently economic language grounded in free enterprise or in liberal economics, but they all sing to a chord that the worst thing for the market is competition, and people realize in industry that the last thing they want is free markets or competition. And I remember I went to a lecture with you actually to hear Mickey Cantor, who talked about how NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, would only actually need one piece of paper if it was a free trade agreement, no tariffs. But that to actually have all the documentation that goes with NAFTA, you need a couple of, because what NAFTA and other free trade agreements represent is actually the codification of special interests, which is diminishing market, diminishing competition, and codifying access or codifying monopolies, codifying monopsonies. I don't know if Adam Smith could possibly visualize this type of arrangement.
Well, it's interesting that Smith, we know, was in favor of freer trade, but he also was worried about getting there too quickly. So I think he would, to some degree, be sympathetic to the idea that you would have a trade agreement that would have more than just one line, zero tariffs. And the reason for that is because prior to having a trade agreement that would get rid of the barriers to trade, people made investments in factories and other kinds of investments. And Smith felt that it would be injurious to those people to draw the rug out from under them in one fell swoop. So Smith was in favor of freer trade, but he thought you should get there slowly over time to allow for adjustments and not allow people's investments to be destroyed overnight. So there's kind of interesting case that you brought up of NAFTA, and you could see an argument for Smith saying, yeah, we could have provisions that would say this is what the trade agreement would look like for the first 5 years, this is the second 5 years, and then so on, where gradually over time we would become freer and more open. But thanks for that example.
And I'll let you go with one more question. I'm just kind of curious. I would imagine it would have been impossible for him during his time to imagine the ecological damages that the Industrial Revolution would rack, since he's at the very beginning of the process of leading to the Industrial Revolution. But did he ever have any notion of the ecological problem with perpetual growth, or have any comments on an economic system that is founded on a notion of perpetual growth?
I am not aware of any such comments, but as I mentioned before, he has a moral system, the theory of moral sentiments, that allows for change over time. So Adam Smith's moral system is not set in concrete. The building block for ethics in Adam Smith is the moral sentiments, or your feelings that are in alignment with other people's feelings about right and wrong. And if over time I come to understand how my actions are causing you pain, a well-socialized person would then adjust their behavior over time. So Adam Smith would totally and completely understand how in the 20th century, as our moral conscience grows and our moral imagination is aroused by looking at the environment and how some people are being injured by the behavior of other people, I don't think you would have any problem at all saying we need to change and adjust our behavior, because the behavior of the past did not properly account for how we're causing harm to other people. And I don't think you would have any compunction whatsoever with saying the institutional rules can and should change as we learn more about what our responsibilities are towards other people on the planet.